So here we're going to start talking about ways to track some of the evidence for evolution. And we're going to start off with structural cladograms. Those are cladograms that refer to physical structures that species have. They're also sometimes called morphological cladograms because morphology, you know from the video, is all about the study of shapes. So we can talk about my favorite sort of environmental science discipline ever, and some of you are students of this and you don't even know it. If you like to go fishing in the creek, you're a student of this. Fluvial geomorphology. So next time you just want to blow off an afternoon and stand in a nice creek hole and cast for a while, you tell people, yeah, I'm going to go out and study the interactions of fluviogeomorphology and riverine species, and that should cover it. Fluviogeomorphology is the shape of landforms as created by streams, but it sounds real fancy. So we're looking at structural and morphological cladograms, and these you're going to do on your own. If you did the video last night, you can probably already define most of these because most of these were in the video. But after we do some stuff here together, you'll do these for homework before you turn this in. This is a fantastic graphic. This is by a guy who's a professor. It's Dr. I forget his name, but it's on the slide. He's a professor of evolutionary biology, and it addresses a really common misconception. You know, your family tree isn't a single straight line from, grandma to mom to you, or from great-grandpa to grandpa to dad to you. It's got all kinds of branches. Who here has at least one sibling? Okay. So, yeah, I don't either. Who here has at least one cousin? I have those. Okay. When we look at a cladogram, we're looking at common ancestors. So, I know one of your siblings at least. Who's your common ancestor with your sibling? What? I have a common ancestor with my sibling? There's somebody that you have in common with your sibling, or two people. Your parents. That's your common ancestor. Your ancestor is somebody who came before you. You are the descendant of your ancestors. So, your mom, your dad, those are your ancestors. You and your siblings share a common ancestor, your parents. Who do you and your cousins share? You don't have the same parents, but you have the same grandparents. Right. So if we look at a family tree, it's not this straight line. Here's you. Your siblings branched off from you. They're different. You share a common ancestor, which is your parents. If you go back another generation to the grandparents, you share that common ancestor with your cousins. So let me ask you this. Who are you more closely related to? Your siblings or your cousins? More closely related to?
I don't know. I swear I've heard that before.
No. You're more closely related to your siblings because you have a more recent common ancestor. Your common ancestor is one generation from you. With your cousins, your common ancestor is 2 generations from you.
That's what I thought. But
Yeah. Somebody probably told you that, but it's bogus.
And I was like, are you sure?
Because they were trying to sound all like smart and like you would never guess. Well, yeah, they're just wrong, and tell them so. Kick them in the shins too. I have a big family. Like my family in my generation is tiny. I'm an only child, but my dad had 52 first cousins. So we have big family reunions. They're great. Food's awesome. Lots of really disgusting whipped cream desserts. Those first cousins of his, they shared a grandparent. Their kids and me share great-grandparents. I am less closely related to them than I am to my first cousins. So similarly, and this did not mean to devolve into a discussion of, family trees, when we talk about evolution, it's not this straight line. Fish don't become salamanders, become cats, become people. Evolution is a series of branching sort of decision points where you share common ancestors, and the further back that common ancestor is, the less closely related two species are. When we look at evolution, and right now we're just talking about structural evolution and how structures show evolution. We've got 2 basic places that structural evidence shows up. The first one's in the fossil record. So This is the fossil history of the horse, genus Equus. And 50 million years ago, there were ancestor species of the horse. They don't look like modern horses. They're teeny. They look more like poodles. They're like knee-high. You couldn't pull a plow with them for sure. But what we see in the fossil record is that past forms or past species show gradual changes to present forms. And we can see structural similarities, and we can see structural differences. And that's one piece of structural evidence. So for instance, in the horses, we can see that this earliest horse ancestor has more defined toes, like you see on a cat or a dog. And over 50 million years, we see some of those bones in the foot start to fuse, because the ones that were able to run harder, faster on that fused bone were more successful at getting away from predators. Until we get to the modern horse, about 3 million years ago, we see our first modern horses, and they've got one fused bone down there. And it used to be a bunch of little bones, but you know, you have mutations, you have variation, eventually we get to something that has a fused bone. Now, structural evidence also shows up in living things. So if we look at humans, cats, whales, bats, coyotes, actually we can look at some other things. These are all mammals. Everybody hold up your forelimb. Oh, look at that, it's your forelimb. If you were a cat or a dog, it would be your front leg and paw. If you were a bat, it would be your wing. If you're a whale, it's your flipper. It's a terrible flipper. Anyway, if we look at the forelimb of all those mammal species, we're going to see the exact same arrangement of bones. One long bone, two smaller bones, a whole bunch of little tiny squished together bones, and then a bunch of short long bones, phalanges. That actually shows up in all tetrapods, which is kind of interesting. But it's that same pattern again and again and again. Because in living species, what we have are homologous, and I can never spell this, homologous, it never looks right to me, structures that show evidence of common ancestors. This is kind of like some characteristic that maybe you and your cousin share that you both got from your grandma. So in my family, it's the Moser curl, which is what we call this stupid cowlick that sticks up and you can't do anything with. And me and like 3 of my first cousins have it, and my grandma had it, and we all have this stupid piece that sticks up right there. Well, that's because we inherited it from a common ancestor. So if we look at this arrangement of bones in humans and cats and whales and bats, we inherited that from a common ancestor. We don't know exactly which ancestor we inherited it from. Somebody might, but I don't. But we got that structure from a common ancestor. Oh, look, you've got your whoever's bone arrangement. That's so sweet. Cladograms! So it's kind of like a family tree. This is a diagram that we use to trace ancestry and trace similarities and trace relatedness in species. And these are just 2 different styles of cladogram. You'll see a couple different styles before we're all done. Based on what you saw in the video last night, can you put a blue dot or circle in blue where the common ancestors of these species are? I'm going to do it too. Go. Hopefully you've got something like that. And if you're on slides, you can use the dot feature or the draw a shape feature and just put a blue dot. So, you know, this is the last common ancestor of A and B. This is the last common ancestor of A and C or B and C. It's the point where their lines split off. That's the last common ancestor of A and B. This is the last common ancestor of C with A or C with B. And this is, if we use that family tree analogy, it's kind of like your grams. So, you know, maybe your aunt had a couple of kids. Here's cousin number 1. Here's cousin number 2. Maybe she just has dogs. I don't know. But each of those branching points is a common ancestor. So when you look at this chart, and you can draw this for the next person who tries to tell you you're more closely related to your cousins than you are to your siblings, you can look at this and say, well, no, because my common ancestor with my siblings is here. My last common ancestor with my cousins is way back here. So I am more closely related to my siblings than my cousins. So there, I kick you in the shins. Okay, so now what we're going to do, this is actually part of an old worksheet packet that I used to use, but we're going to kind of do this together as a walkthrough exercise. So we've got a cladogram with a number of groups of living things on it. And we've got, everything from sharks to birds. So the first thing I want you to do is go ahead and circle the shared derived characteristics. And you should know this from the video last night. Circle those in red. And I'm going to do it, and then you can check yourself. You might have something like that. And they're shared characteristics because you share them with groups of living things that you have a common ancestor with. And they're derived because they're derived from your common ancestor. So, my Moser curl is derived from like some crazy Swiss person living up a mountain. I don't know their name. Birds and crocodiles have a common ancestor who had eggs with shells. And we don't know what species that ancestor was, but we know that somewhere back there's a common ancestor that they both got that feature from. So the way that cladograms work, just to refresh, and again, if you watch the video, this should be pretty simple for you. When we see a shared derived characteristic listed here, everything above the point where that shared derived characteristic shows up has that characteristic. So crocodiles and birds both have eggs with shells. Which groups, well, I should also say, anything that is below that point does not have that characteristic. So for instance, primates and rodents are below the eggs with shells. They don't have eggs with shells. All right, so now with that, circle all the groups that would have 4 limbs in green. Did you circle amphibians? I should hope so. And primates and rabbits and crocodiles and birds? Awesome. Because those are the ones that have got 4 limbs. Oh, I think I did this on 2 slides, but that's okay. So those are the ones that have got 4 limbs. And of course, these are our shared derived characteristics. All right, now that you're good at that, let's go to a clean slide. You don't have to, obviously. Which is the only group in this cladogram that doesn't have a bony skeleton? So there's bony skeleton, who's the only group that splits off before bony skeletons evolve. Sharks don't have a bony skeleton. They're called cartilaginous fish. The cartilage that you have in your nose and your ears makes up their whole skeleton. They do not have a bone skeleton. Questions on using a cladogram for this kind of interpretation? Straightforward so far? All right. So we're going to do a couple more things with the cladogram. So list all the shared derived characteristics that amphibians, that's these guys, and primates have in common. So remember that everything that exists below a line where a group splits off, that group has. So primates have, because here's where primates line splits off the main line. Primates have an amniotic egg, 4 limbs, bony skeleton, and vertebrae. Which of those do amphibians have? Well, here's where amphibians line splits off. Whoops, that was really terrible, Moser. Amphibians line splits off right there. Which of those things do amphibians have? Give me one of them, Seth.
They have a bony skeleton.
They do. They have a bony skeleton. Give me one more, Sierra. They have 4 limbs. Give me one, Alyssa. There's only one left. They have vertebra. Yeah. So, which things do amphibians and primates have in common? Well, both of them have 4 limbs, a bony skeleton, and vertebrae. Amphibians do not have an amniotic egg. Okay, well, that's all well and good, but can we use this cladogram to tell which is more closely related to a species? So, which is more closely related to birds, primates or crocodiles? There are birds. Here are primates. Where's their last common ancestor? Well, the last place that they had a line in common was right there. Now, here's birds. Whoa, that's terrible. Here's birds, and here's crocodiles. And where did they last have a common ancestor? Oh, right there. So birds and crocodiles are obviously much more closely related because they had a more recent common ancestor. Okay, so we can figure out who's more closely related to who. We can figure out which characteristics 2 groups have in common. Let's talk about eggs. Which groups listed above have an egg with an amnion? Who has peeled a hard-boiled egg? I've peeled a lot of them this week. I've been eating them for breakfast and lunch, all, with little bits of dye bleeding into the egg. When you peel a hard-boiled egg, you've got the white, you've got the yolk, you've got the white, and then there's that membrane between the shell and the white. That's the amnion. So an amnion is a membrane around an egg. Do humans have an amnion? You ever heard of amniotic fluid? You ever heard of, yeah. Human eggs have an amnion. That membrane becomes the sac in which a human develops. And it's got fluid in it. That's an amnion. So, which groups have an amniotic egg? Okay, yes, sir. Yeah, sign up. So, I've got primates, rodents, and rabbits, crocodiles, and birds. You agree? Okay. Somebody in the other class said, and this is so fantastic, I should have paid somebody $0.25 to say it. But wait a minute, aren't rodents a mammal? Mammals don't lay eggs. Right? So, how do primates and rodents have an amniotic egg? Huh? I know, I was seeing if anybody caught that. Yeah, we do. Because but it's internalized fertily. It's fertilized internally, it develops internally. In crocodiles and birds, it's fertilized and then cast out of the body, hence the shell. But in humans, it's fertilized internally. In all primates and in all rodents and in all rabbits, it's fertilized internally, develops internally. But it's still got an amnion. Amphibian eggs, if you look at where they come in, don't have an amnion. So they're just a snot glob. Where do amphibians lay their eggs? In water. They have to lay them in water. They don't have an amnion to keep those eggs from drying out. Fish also don't have an amnion. Fish eggs have to be in water. If you get them out of water, they'll dry up. Crocodile eggs actually have both an amnion and a shell, but eggs without an amnion, without that membrane, typically have to be laid in water. Okay. Oh, and I just gave something away. So, what's the difference between the egg of a rodent and that of a crocodile? So here are our rodents. Here are our crocs. If we trace back the line, what shared derived characteristic do crocodiles have that rodents don't? Who haven't I picked on yet? Brody. Yeah, crocodiles have a shelled egg. Now it's a soft shell like a turtle. Most reptile eggs have a soft shell. But yeah, croc eggs have a shell. Rabbit eggs don't. Except those ones you found Sunday that were all different colors. Or plastic. So yeah, crocodiles have eggs have a shell. Man, that is some terrible handwriting. Rabbit eggs do not. Okay, so let's look at recent common ancestry. Shrink that just a little bit. Which two groups have a more recent common ancestor? Crocodiles and primates? Where's their most recent common ancestor? So we have to follow their lines back to the point where they meet, and that would be right there. So that would be the most recent common ancestor of primates and crocodiles. Or crocodiles and amphibians, and we can follow their line back to there. Who's more closely related to crocodiles, primates or amphibians? The answer might surprise you. Yeah, crocodiles and primates are actually more closely related. You know, and it's one of those things that before we totally understood some stuff about genetics and evolution, reptiles and amphibians get grouped as herptiles. They get grouped together, but they're actually not that closely related. They have different roots. These are the cladograms that make everybody go, ah! For two reasons. The first is, for some reason, the square shape alarms people. They like the diagonal line better. Here's the other reason this one freaks people out. And these are going to show up on the air test. It's got scientific names. Polyplacophora, monoplacophora, bivalva, gastropoda. It doesn't matter. It could say fuzzy woolly butts. It doesn't matter. You read it the same way. So this is a cladogram that shows relationships between mollusks. So this is everything from snails and slugs to octopuses and mussels and scallops and things you've never heard of that live in the bottom of the ocean. So which two groups have got the most recent common ancestor? Remember that when we're looking at this, this is the present, this is the past. So this is the common ancestor of everybody. Which two groups have split off the most recently? I'd put a dot right there. How about you? And what is that? Well, if we zoom in, that's cephalopods, that's squids and octopuses and scaphopoda, tusk shells. What the heck are those? It doesn't matter. It absolutely doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you can't pronounce it. Doesn't matter if you don't know what it is. Doesn't matter if you've never heard of it. Doesn't matter if it's got 3 heads and it flies and it's purple. All you got to do is be able to read it. So, cephalopods literally means head foot, and scaphopoda. Okay. Which is more closely related to snails? So to do that, we got to find snails. Oh, there they are. Snails, gastropods. That literally means stomach foot because of the way they're arranged. They have a muscular foot and their stomach sits on top of it. Okay, so which is more closely related to them? Clams and scallops? Well, where's that? Here's clams and scallops. So where's their last common ancestor? I have to go all the way back to here. Okay, so there's that. What are my other choices? Squid and octopi. So that's here. Most recent ancestor with snails would be there. Okay. Chitons. What the heck's a chiton? Does it matter? Nope. They're actually pretty cool, but it doesn't matter. Whoa, those guys haven't been related to snails in a long time. What's my last option? Monoplacophora. Most recent ancestor with snails would be there. Okay, so there's that. What are my other choices? Squid and octopi. So that's here. Most recent ancestor with snails would be there. Okay. Chitons. What the heck's a chiton? Does it matter? Nope. They're actually pretty cool, but it doesn't matter. Whoa, those guys haven't been related to snails in a long time. What's my last option? Monoplacophora. Monoplacophora. Let's shrink that line. There are my monoplacophoras. There are my snails. Okay, they've got the same line there. So definitely squid are most closely related. So you know that slug in your garden? It's most closely related to a squid of any of those things. Squid and octopi. Questions on how to find common ancestors, how to find close relationships. All right, so the next few slides are homework. You're going to have time to do them in class. So you're going to do these in whatever format. When you walk in tomorrow, you'll turn in the whole presentation. You'll have these two done, and then tomorrow we're going to do this together, and you're going to have some time to do the air test questions, and we will go over the air test questions, and we'll have another video for homework. I know we're kind of pacing through this, but after the air test, life's going to be pretty sweet and pretty easy. So, questions?